Coming up on this week's GCN Racing news show, how much training and what type of training are the pro riders doing at this time of year? I'll be looking at exactly what Van Aert, Kuss, Vollering, Demi, Kopecky and Vives have been up to over the past few weeks. I'll also look back on yet another action-packed weekend of cyclocross action and wrap up all the other racing-related news as well. This week in the world of racing, we learnt that training in the Arctic Circle is only for hardcore cyclists. This is Andreas Leknesund out on a spin in minus 24 degrees Celsius or 11 degrees Fahrenheit, complete with eyelash extensions. We also learnt that there's a brand new obstacle in the world of cyclocross.
Oh my goodness. On the course. Oh my God.
Move over planks and off-camber section, ducks are here. And apparently they make for a quacking race. I shall get my coat. We also learnt what Arkea's 2024 team kit looks like through some Blair Witch-style photos taken by the team in the woods. Kit-wise, the all-red jersey remains, albeit with the addition of the B&B Hotel's name to the chest. We also got to see the new BMC bikes for Tudor Pro Cycling in 2024. This is the Team Machine R that they're going to be using. Fantastic looking bikes, in my opinion. It's definitely a hot from me. And finally, we learnt that the 2025 Tour de France Grand Départ is perfect for British fans to hop over and watch. It's going to start in Lille, just over an hour's drive from Calais on Saturday the 5th of July, with the first of 3 stages that take place in the Nord-Pas-de-Calais region. The first of those is pretty much pan flat, which should mean it'll be the first opportunity for a sprinter to take the first yellow jersey of the Tour de France in 6 years. The last time was back in 2019 when Mike Turnison won the bunch sprint into Brussels after his teammate Dylan Groenewegen was taken out by a crash. There are a couple of bergs to take on stage 2, however, 2 of which come in the final 10 kilometres of the stage into Boulogne, so it's likely that we'll see a change in the leader's jersey that day. The third stage is much flatter again, taking them from Valenciennes to Dunkirk, but it'll be the prospect of crosswinds on the flat open roads of the finale that will be making everybody nervous that day. Unfortunately, despite the proximity of the Grand Départ to the cobblestones of Paris-Roubaix, they won't be venturing onto any of them in 2025. Though that is a wise decision, I would say. Cobbled stages at the Tour de France are carnage at the very best of times. They'd be even worse if they came within the first couple of stages. Although, to be fair, they did come on stage 3 back in 2010, where Thor Hushovd took the win. Going to move on to cyclocross and the big 3 now. Pidcock, Van Aert and Van der Poel have now all revealed their race plans for the winter months, so we can see where they'll all be up against each other. There are going to be 6 events through December and January that will be graced by the presence of all 3, the first of which is on the 23rd of December in Antwerp for the UCI World Cup. They'll be present again for the next 2 rounds of the UCI World Cup on the 26th and 30th of December in Gare and Holst, and then for the X2O in Koksijde on the 4th of January. That is a must-watch for the course as much as for the riders competing. And then it's on to 2 more World Cup rounds in the new year, Zonhoven on the 7th of January and Benidorm 2 weeks after that. Unfortunately though, Van der Poel is the only one of the 3 who will compete at the World Cyclocross Championships next February. The 3 are also taking quite different approaches to their preparation for this winter season. Whilst Van der Poel was busy sunning himself on a ride with Remco Evenepoel in the warmer climes of Spain last week, Van Aert has chosen a more traditional method of acclimatising himself to the types of condition he'll be facing in cyclocross racing by training a lot more at home in Belgium. That included a 10-kilometre run in what he described as wet snow on Strava. Pidcock's preparation we know less about, although as mentioned last week, he was recently in France to do a recon of next year's gravel stage of the Tour. And that brings us nicely on to the main talking point for this week. How much training are the pros doing at this time of year? With the help of Strava, we can get a pretty good insight into that, even if not all pros upload all their training. We've already seen that Andreas Leknesund is out training in some horrifically cold conditions and that Van Aert is busy combining running with cycling. But let's zoom in a bit more into what the Belgian is doing. Over the last 4 weeks, he has averaged 535 kilometres a week on the bike, or 16.5 hours, plus an hour and 20 minutes or so of running per week, which equates to around 17 kilometres. Last week was his biggest week of training since taking a break at the end of the road season. On Monday, he did a 103-kilometre point-to-point road ride from the Jumbo-Visma HQ in the Netherlands to his home in Belgium. Tuesday, he did a ride that he named Yearly Wake-Up Call, to which Elizabeth replied, "Please don't wake up too much." And that's because it was Van Aert's first big training day on his Velo R5 cyclocross bike. 69 kilometres in total in 2 3/4 hours. The following morning, he did his aforementioned wet snow run, 10 kilometres in 46 minutes, and later that morning, his longest ride of the week, 147 k's in just over 4.5 hours. Thursday was the easiest day he had last week, a flat 27k ride. That said, it wasn't exactly at recovery ride pace, just under 32 kilometres per hour average, which is 20 miles per hour. He pretty didn't want to be hanging around too long that day, as it was 0 degrees outside. On Friday, he did a 100-kilometre steady road ride with former pro and now pundit Jan Bakelants. And then Saturday was another double day, running intervals in the morning, 14 kilometres in exactly an hour. And then that afternoon, he did a ride that he named off-road intervals, 90 k's in just under 3 hours. And finally, on Sunday, a group gravel ride of 116 kilometres that he did on his cyclocross bike in 4 hours. So in total, 23 hours of training, either on the bike or running last week for Van Aert, plus presumably some other strength or flexibility type workouts that he didn't record on Strava. Interesting to note, though, that all of that training was done in and around his home in Belgium, and he didn't take a single Strava segment for the whole week. True to style, though, he did take a second spot on a segment on yesterday's gravel ride. That was harsh, wasn't it? I should caveat that joke by saying that I absolutely love Wout Van Aert. I think he's fantastic for the sport of cycling. Now, another rider who's been training around Belgium is Arnaud Demi. Now, as a rider who is not competing in cyclocross over this winter, you might think he'd be taking it a little easier. Not so, really. He may only have uploaded 5 rides in the week, but they totaled over 18 hours of riding. With a lot of snow in his area of Belgium last week, 4 of those 5 rides were done on a mountain bike, but his road ride was the longest of the week, 146 kilometres in just under 5 hours around the southeastern corner of Belgium and into Luxembourg. Demi is a rider who still uploads his files with power, and whilst there was nothing exceptional about that ride, it looked like a steady endurance ride, there were some notable numbers in a ride he'd done the week before. That was a ride that took place around the Flemish Ardennes, taking in many of the famous climbs on the Tour of Flanders route. On one of those, the Wolvenberg, he had a highest 1-minute power of the ride, a whopping 920 watts. Whilst on the Berendries, he did 747 watts for 1 minute and 44 seconds, averaging close to 32 kilometres per hour on the climb. So not exactly taking it easy, even if he won't be racing yet for another couple of months. Now, unfortunately, Vingegaard, Roglic and Pogačar aren't uploading their rides to Strava at the moment, so the only data point we have for a recent Grand Tour winner is that of Sepp Kuss. He resumed serious training in the first week of November, once returning to his base in Andorra, and since then he's averaged 18.5 hours per week and 441 kilometres. His biggest week so far was the second week of November, 26 hours in total, including some road, plenty of gravel riding, and a couple of pretty big and hilly hikes as well. So, whilst his next big race goals are still a long way away, he's already been putting in the hard yards. And unlike his teammate Wout Van Aert, Kuss did take a Strava segment. And it wasn't just because his teammates let him either. He won it fair and square. On the women's side, Lorena Wiebes has been uploading most of her activities to Strava. Last week, she did just under 420 kilometres and 18 hours on the bike. A mix of road and off-road, but she also recorded a couple of strength training sessions in the gym. All of that was done around her base in the Netherlands, and while she didn't take any segments, she did become a local legend on a couple of them. Award for the most diverse type of training, though, must go to Lotte Kopecky. Over the past 7 days, she's done 1 run, a couple of road rides, 1 strength training session, 1 session on the rollers, and a laboratory test. Award for having the most fun on the bike, though, has to go to Demi Vollering. She doesn't upload everything to Strava, but last week she was back out on the mountain bike with her dog. Now, those of you who follow her on Instagram will have seen her carrying her dog on her back on bike rides, but in the video on Strava, you can see it let off the leash once they get to the off-road sections. Poor dog, though, you've got to say, having to try and keep up with Demi Vollering on her ride. Neither Vollering nor the dog have won any segments on Strava, as far as I can see, over the past 7 days. So there you have it. Most pro riders are already very focused on their training for the 2024 season. Their off-season break now in the rear-view mirror. But are they doing more or less than you would expect at this time of year for full-time cyclists? You can let me know in the comment section down below. Onto the racing then that took place at the weekend, and I'll start with the Superprestige in Boom on Saturday. In the men's, it didn't take long for a hierarchy to be formed. 2 laps in, Joris Nieuwenhuis of Balois Trek lines forged clear, and only Cameron Mason of Cyclocross Reds was able to follow, albeit at a distance. It was a bit like an hour-long individual pursuit in which the gap constantly remained tantalisingly close, anywhere from 5 to 12 seconds. Unfortunately for Mason, though, he never managed to close it completely. Nieuwenhuis crossed the line to take what was his second successive win in the Superprestige series. Second place for Mason, though, might have been frustrating, but it's the first time he's placed so highly in one of the major cyclocross competitions. It feels like a win isn't too far away now for him. Third place on the day for Iserbyt was his worst result in the Superprestige series so far, but that consistency has given him a substantial lead in the overall standings. He sits on 72 points, whilst Niels van der Putte is in second on 49. In the women's, Fem van Empel was on the start line, and so it goes without saying that 3/4 of an hour later, she crossed the finish line in first place. Maybe that's a bit harsh on the others, but to be honest, there hasn't really been any sign that somebody is about to challenge Van Empel, who's now won all 8 races that she's started this season. On this occasion, she beat Puk Pieterse by just over a minute, whilst third place for Anne-Marie Wurst was enough to move her into the overall lead in the Superprestige standings. Van Empel chose not to make the 650-kilometre journey to Flamanville in France for the World Cup the next day, and she wasn't the only one. World Cup leader Celine Del Carmen Alvarado and Puk Pieterse were also absent, the former through illness. Of those who did start, Lucinda Brandt was the big favourite, and she more than lived up to that expectation. Marie Schreiber made her normal very fast start, but by the second lap, Brandt was already in command and steadily increasing her advantage. She was able to throttle back, actually, over the last couple of laps, knowing she was almost guaranteed the win, whilst the battle for second was between Schreiber and Bentveld, neither of whom had ever been on an elite World Cup podium before. Well, they both have now. Schreiber the second step and Bentveld the third at the age of just 19. Brandt is now 30 points behind Alvarado in the overall standings, with Van der Heide in third and Bentveld up to fourth. In the men's, most of the main protagonists were present and correct. Pim Ronhaar, the only man to have won more than one World Cup this season, looked like he might be on course for a third. He was particularly strong in the early stages and soon found himself out front alone. And it was looking very good, actually, for Balois' Trek Lions. Van der Haar and Nieuwenhuis weren't far behind and so were able to mark any moves. Well, they were for a while anyway, but eventually Elie Iserbyt was too strong for all of them. A lacklustre start for him left him with a lot of ground to make up, but as we all know, he never gives up. He'd soon left Van der Haar and Nieuwenhuis in his wake, and on lap 5, he'd made the junction with Ronhaar at the head of the race. And it wasn't long before he dropped him too. Iserbyt flew around the final couple of laps to claim his second UCI World Cup win of the season and extended his advantage in the overall standings. The Balois Trek Lions would have to settle for second, third and fourth on the day. Iserbyt now leads Ronhaar by 34 points in the UCI World Cup with 8 of the 14 rounds remaining. On to what we've got coming up for you on GCN Plus this week, and it's another weekend of cyclocross coming up. On Saturday, the exact series continues with round 2 in Essen, whilst on Sunday we have the next round of the UCI World Cup from Val di Sole in the mountains of northern Italy. And you know what that means? Snow. And lots of it, if the last 2 years are anything to go by. Territory restrictions apply to both races, so please check if it's available to watch where you are. Meanwhile, our documentary this week is focused on what is arguably the most famous mountain in cycling, Alpe d'Huez. It's featured at the Tour de France on more than 30 occasions, and some of the biggest names in the sport have had victories there. In this film, Connor Dunn rides up the mountain with one of those former winners, Frank Schleck, whilst there are plenty of other high-profile contributors to the documentary. Here's the trailer.
With its unmistakable 21 hairpins, it's cycling's most recognisable climb.
This is a mountain beyond cycling, beyond sport.
It's an arena.
Is het nou Kamp of San Siro? Alpe d'Huez werd een begrip, omdat er zoveel wielergeschiedenis ontstond.
A place where even the pros dream of winning.
I came here as a kid and had these sparkles in my eyes. Oh, I wanted to win the Alpe d'Huez one day.
That will be out to watch from tomorrow, Tuesday the 5th of December, for GCN Plus subscribers, and you'll have until the 19th of December to watch it and any of the other content on GCN Plus, not the 17th of December, as I said last week on this show. I'll just wrap up some other bits of news now before we finish. We already knew that Nairo Quintana will be making his return to competition with Movistar next year. Now we know at which race he'll be competing at the Vuelta a la Comunitat Valenciana, which runs from the 31st of January to the 4th of February next year. By then, it'll be almost a year since he last pinned a number on, which was at the Colombian National Championships at the start of this year. One bit of news that came out just too late to be included in last week's racing news show was the signings and new kit for AG2R. The 6 new signings are Sam Bennett, Victor Lafay, Bruno Armeirai, Dries de Bont, Sander de Pestel from Flanders Baloise and Gianluca Poliflit from Lotto Destiny's development team. New kit, though, was the big talking point, not because of what it did include, but what it didn't include. No more brown shorts. The cycling world has been in a state of shock and disbelief over this past week, and some in a state of mourning. The team's brown shorts have been one of the biggest talking points in cycling for the past 13 years, since they were introduced in 2010, but they are now consigned to the history books. Gone, but definitely not forgotten, and who knows, maybe they'll make a return sooner rather than later. And finally, only one major transfer to talk to you about this week. Davide Chimolai is departing Israel Premier Tech at the end of this season, and he'll be moving to Movistar in 2024. Right, that is all for this week's show, but I'll see you again at the same time next week.